She lay on the cold ground, her arms too weak to lift her head. The sky above was dark and endless, stars blinking like cold eyes. The wind cut through her thin robe, and dust stuck to her skin. She had not eaten in 2 days, and her lips were cracked from thirst. Sarah, once a respected alien warrior, was now nothing but a broken figure left to die. Her people had left her behind. She failed a mission, and instead of death by sword, they chose silence. They dropped her on this empty world, a planet with sharp rocks, dry air, and no life, no trees, no food, no shelter, only the cold and the long wait for death. She tried to crawl under a small rock outcrop, but her legs gave up halfway, so she stayed there, shivering. Staring up at the sky, she whispered to herself, not even sure if her words still mattered, "Is this how I end?" She said weakly, "Just dust and forgotten stars." Then she heard something. At first, it was the sound of rocks moving. Maybe a falling stone, but no, it was steady, heavy, the sound of boots. Someone was walking nearby. Her heart raced, though her body stayed still. Was it her people, coming to finish the job? Or some wild beast ready to eat her bones? She tried to sit up, failed, and simply stared toward the sound. From behind a boulder, a figure appeared. It wasn't alien, it was human, tall, strong shoulders, wearing a dirty jacket and carrying a large sack. The human stopped, looking at her, his face unreadable. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the wind moved. Sarah's eyes filled with fear. She had heard of humans wild, emotional, dangerous. Some aliens said they had hearts of gold, others said they were mad. This one stepped closer, then slowly dropped his bag. She flinched, thinking he might attack, but instead he knelt down and pulled out a water flask. He placed it near her hand without a word. Sarah blinked, confused. Then he offered her a small, dry food bar. She looked at the food, then at him. Her pride screamed not to accept, but her stomach screamed louder with shaking hands. She took it and nibbled a small bite. Tears slipped down her dirty cheeks, not from the taste, but from the kindness. The man watched her for a while, then stood up. He looked around, then began picking up stones. Big, flat ones, heavy ones, ones shaped like bricks. Sarah thought he was building a fire pit, but then he started laying them in a pattern. One stone, then another, then another. Stacking them like a low wall, he moved like a man with a plan. Calm and strong, Sarah tried to speak. Her voice cracked. "Why? Why are you doing this?" The man didn't answer. He just gave her a look, not cold, not warm, just steady. Then he kept building. Sarah watched him, confused and weak. She didn't know if this was some human trick, but part of her wanted to believe it wasn't. As night came, the air grew colder. The man lit a small fire beside the unfinished wall. He placed a blanket over her shoulders. It smelled like smoke and old fabric, but it was warm. And it made her cry again. He sat beside the fire. Silent, Sarah whispered, "Are you building a house?" The man gave a small nod, still not speaking. She closed her eyes, the warmth and food making her sleepy. Before sleep took her, she said one last thing. "Even if I die tomorrow." "Thank you, human." The fire crackled, and the stars watched from above. Sarah slept for the first time in days, wrapped in warmth and mystery. And beside her, the human laid another stone, slowly shaping the beginning of something more than shelter. He wasn't just building a house, he was building hope. She woke up to the sound of hammering, steady and calm, like a heartbeat made of stone. For a moment, Sarah forgot where she was, her eyes blinking against the pale morning sky. But then she felt the blanket still over her, smelled the smoke of last night's fire, and heard the same rhythm again. She turned her head slowly. And there he was, the human, still working, still silent. still stacking rocks as if it was the most important thing in the universe. She sat up slowly, her body aching but no longer screaming. The water flask was near her hand again, now filled fresh. She drank and looked at him, still unsure what kind of man would feed a stranger, give her warmth, and begin building a wall without speaking a word. Sierra had known many kinds of people, commanders, traitors, killers, but never one like this. He didn't ask who she was, what crime she committed, or why her people left her behind. He only kept working, as if her past didn't matter. Sarah watched him shape the walls, pressing clay between the rocks, balancing each piece with care. Each stone he placed felt like a question without words, like he was saying, "You are not useless. You are not forgotten." She finally stood up, legs shaking but holding, and walked slowly toward him. The human looked up, surprised but calm, then handed her a flat rock. She hesitated, holding the stone in both hands, unsure what to do. He pointed at the wall, then to the gap between two others. Sarah understood, and gently placed the stone where he showed her. It fit. A strange feeling bloomed in her chest, small but warm, like something new waking up. She said quietly, "I don't understand you." He looked at her, and for the first time, smiled. Little, just a hint at the corner of his mouth. Then he kept working, and so did she. They didn't speak much that day, but they built together, side by side, stone by stone. The wall grew taller, stronger. Sarah's hands grew dirty, her arms sore, but her heart lighter. She had never built anything in her life, only destroyed, followed orders, fought battles that meant nothing. But now, with each rock she placed, she felt like she was building a new version of herself. That night, as they sat near the fire again, she asked, "What is your name?" He looked up from sharpening a stick, then said simply, "Ethan." She nodded. Then, after a pause, said Sarah. He gave a small nod of respect, and they both stared into the fire in silence. The stars above seemed closer that night, as if they were watching carefully. Sarah felt the weight of silence between them, not as a burden, but as comfort. She was no longer alone, no longer waiting to die. She was still unwanted by her people, still branded a failure, but somehow none of that mattered as much now. The next morning, they started early. Ethan handed her a simple tool, just a stick with a flat stone tied at the end, but it felt like a gift. They continued building, adding a second wall to shape a corner. The wind picked up as the sun rose, cold and sharp. Sarah noticed Ethan's hands were red and cracked from the rough stone. She looked down at her own, cut and bruised, but steady. She felt pride, a strange pride she hadn't tasted in years. That afternoon, while gathering more rocks from a nearby ridge, Sarah paused, her senses sharp. Something moved in the distance, just a flicker, like a shadow slipping behind stone. She narrowed her eyes, ears twitching, heart suddenly alert. She said nothing to Ethan, but kept watching, pretending not to notice. It could have been nothing, or it could have been a scout if someone was tracking her. They now knew she was alive and not alone. When she returned, Ethan looked at her face and paused. She gave him a brief nod, meaning, "We'll talk later." He understood without needing words. They didn't speak of it that night, but both slept with one eye open. The fire burned lower, the air colder, and Sarah, wrapped again in the same old blanket, stared into the stars, thinking. She had no idea why this human had helped her, no idea what he wanted, if anything. But with each stone he placed, with each meal he shared, he was changing her story. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a weapon or a burden. She felt like something worth saving, and that was more terrifying than death. The silence was no longer peaceful. It pressed against her ears like a warning. Sarah sat on a rock, sharpening a piece of metal into a blade, her fingers moving slowly, but her eyes fixed on the cliffs. Something was out there. She felt it in the air, in the way the birds had stopped flying overhead, in the way the wind had turned still and strange. Ethan didn't seem worried. He hummed a quiet tune while digging near the new wall, trying to create a water trench. Sarah watched him work, admiring how he moved with purpose. Like the world didn't scare him anymore. She wanted to believe he was right, that whatever she saw was just dust or shadows, but deep inside, her warrior instincts screamed louder with each passing hour. When the first noise came, it was soft, almost a whisper like metal scraping against rock. Sarah froze, turning her head slightly, her sharpened tool tight in her grip. Ethan noticed the change in her and stood up, his eyes following hers. There was nothing visible, just the bare ridges and flat stones. But she knew someone was watching. They worked in silence the rest of the day, but both were alert now, eyes scanning the cliffs, ears twitching at every shift of wind. Sarah remembered the technology her people once gave her, the kind she wasn't supposed to keep. That night, after Ethan fell asleep beside the fire, she quietly walked to the edge of the shelter, pulled a small piece of alien tech from under her torn belt, and placed it flat on a rock. It blinked once, then glowed faint blue. The scanner began sweeping the area, silently reading movement signatures, heat signals, and sound patterns. The results came back quickly. There were 3 heat sources nearby, 2 large, 1 small lull keeping distance. She cursed under her breath, knowing what that meant. Trackers, probably from her old squad. Maybe bounty hunters, maybe worse. They didn't care, she was no threat now. All they wanted was to erase what they called shame. And anyone who stood near her the next morning, Sarah told Ethan everything. He didn't flinch, didn't yell, didn't run. He simply looked at her for a long moment, then said, "So they want you dead?" She nodded. "And they'll come." "Here," he added. She nodded again. He walked over to the half-finished shelter and stared at it. Then he turned back and said something she didn't expect. "Then we better finish it before they get here." That day, they worked harder than ever before. Sarah dug sharper trenches, laid traps using leftover wires and sharp sticks. Ethan gathered bigger stones and reinforced the walls with layers of hardened clay and dried moss. They built not just to survive the weather now, but to survive war, and strangely, they both smiled more that day than any before. They didn't laugh, didn't joke, but they smiled, because working together felt like armor. Late afternoon, the sky grew darker than usual. Clouds began to move fast, hiding the sun. The scanner lit up again this time. 2 of the heat signatures were closer. Sarah handed Ethan the blade she made and took another for herself. They didn't speak, only nodded, as if words would break. The thin line between preparation and fear, they hid behind the half-wall near the shelter's entrance. The fire was out, and the camp looked empty. Then the first attacker came into view, tall, armored, holding a long staff charged with electric points. Sarah recognized him immediately, Zoran, her former commander. He scanned the camp, confused by the silence. The moment he stepped inside, Sarah sprang from behind the wall like a shadow unleashed. She tackled him low, spinning his legs out from under him. Ethan rushed from the other side and slammed his blade into the back of Zoran's leg. The alien screamed, dropped his staff, and rolled away. Sarah grabbed the staff and pointed it at him, her eyes burning with fury. "You left me to die," she said coldly. Zoran bled from his thigh, growled through sharp teeth, "And I'll finish what I started." He spat, but before he could move, a click echoed across the clearing. Ethan had activated one of the traps. Sharp wooden spikes burst from the side and pinned Zoran's arm against a rock. He screamed again, this time in panic. Sarah didn't kill him, not yet. She looked at Ethan, breathing hard, and said, "They know now. They'll all come." Ethan didn't look afraid. He simply picked up another stone and placed it on the wall. "Then we keep building," he said, And just like that, the two of them prepared for what was coming, not with fear, but with purpose. The sky didn't change after the fight, but something inside her did. Sarah stared at her hands, still red from gripping the alien staff. She hadn't held a weapon like that since the day she was exiled. And now, because of this strange human, she had picked it up again, not for orders, not for duty, but to protect something real. The prisoner lay tied under a stone overhang. Groaning softly, Zoran had stopped cursing once he realized no one was going to kill him. Ethan had built a quick cage using metal rods and leftover parts from Sarah's gear. It wasn't perfect, but it held him, and that was enough. They didn't talk about what happened that night. Instead, Ethan placed more stones, stronger ones. And Sarah sealed the gaps with clay. The wind howled harder now, as if the planet itself could feel what was coming. Sarah walked the perimeter, checking traps, setting small alarms, using her scanner's broken pieces. Every small noise made her ears twitch. She wasn't just scared. They both knew this wasn't over. Zoran never worked alone when she came back to the shelter. Ethan had built something new. A doorway shaped not just for function, but for beauty. Smooth stones on the sides, a flat arch on top. Sarah stared at it in surprise, then looked at him. "You made that just now?" she asked. He nodded once, wiping sweat from his brow. "I thought it should feel like a real home," he said simply. Sarah blinked. The words hitting something inside her chest she didn't know still worked. She sat beside him by the fire. Legs folded, arms resting on her knees. Zoran's weak moans echoed from far behind them. But neither moved. Ethan took a breath and finally asked what he hadn't before. "What did you do?" Sarah didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, "I refused to follow a cruel order." She looked up, eyes shimmering from firelight. "I was told to destroy an entire village, children, elders, everyone. They said they were hiding rebels." Ethan listened quietly, never interrupting. "I warned them. I begged my commander. But he said mercy was weakness." She continued, "So I destroyed the weapons instead, not the people." There was silence for a long time after she spoke. The fire crackled, and the wind outside began to settle. Ethan finally said, "That's not weakness." Sarah looked at him, her throat tight. "They called it betrayal," she said. "I was stripped of rank, exiled, dropped here to disappear." Ethan stood and walked to the wall, placing another stone in silence. Then he looked back at her. "You don't disappear when someone still sees you," he said quietly. Sarah didn't respond, but she picked up another stone and joined him. That night, the alarm traps clicked twice, but nothing came. False movements, maybe wind, maybe watchers testing their patience. Sarah didn't sleep, and neither did Ethan. They kept the fire low, weapons nearby. The half-finished shelter now felt like a fortress, not just of stone, but of trust. When morning arrived, Zoran was gone. The cage had been cut open from the outside, clean and fast. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She ran to the ridge, saw deep footprints. 3 sets all headed north. She didn't need to guess. "They'll bring more," she told Ethan. "Next time, they won't just watch." Ethan stared out into the distance, the morning light turning his eyes gold. "How many?" he asked. 5, maybe 10, she replied. "Maybe more if they think I'm alive and dangerous." He turned and looked at the shelter. At the doorway, the walls, the traps, the tools. Then he nodded slowly. "Then we need more stones." The day turned into a blur of effort. They worked like 2 hearts beating in one rhythm. Sarah used broken drone parts to reinforce the wall edges. Ethan crafted spears using fallen branches and sharpened scrap. Together, they dug hidden tunnels beneath the shelter's base, in case escape became the only option, but neither wanted to run. They weren't just surviving now, they were standing for something. A man who believed in kindness. A woman once called a traitor, now treated like a person again. and between them, a home rising from nothing but dirt and stone. That night, Syra spoke first. "If we die, it's still worth it," she said, staring at the fire. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed her a small rock flat, clean, shaped like a heart. She held it, surprised. "I found it earlier," he said. "Thought it belonged in the wall." Syra looked down at the rock, then at the shelter. Her voice trembled as she said, "Not in the wall, Ethan. This one's mine." The world didn't shake when the first ship appeared. Hummed, low and deep, like a storm behind the clouds. Sarah stopped mid-swing, her hammer frozen above the stone she was about to place. Ethan looked up from the water trench, his face calm but eyes sharp. They both knew, without words, that this was the moment the shelter was truly being tested. The humming grew louder, closer, and then shadows swept across the ground. A sleek silver vessel cut across the sky, its underside glowing red. It circled slowly. Like a predator choosing where to strike, Sarah's fingers tightened around the hammer, but she didn't run. She stood tall beside the wall they had built, her heart beating steady now, not from fear, but from readiness. Ethan walked over and handed her a short spear. It was one of the tools they had crafted together, part wood, part metal, balanced and fast. She took it with a nod, her body remembering combat, even if her soul had tried to forget it. Then the ship landed. Dust and ash burst upward as the vessel touched ground not far from the ridge. The air shimmered with heat and power, the engines humming down slowly. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Syra could feel them inside. Waiting, checking, arming, and then the door opened. 3 stepped out first, armored, tall, confident. They wore the mark of her old unit. A sharp V burned into their armored chest plates. Behind them came more, holding energy rifles low but ready. Sarah didn't move, didn't blink. She only whispered 5, Ethan added. One more still inside. Sarah glanced at him, surprised, and smiled slightly. "You're learning?" she said, "From the best." He replied. The leader stepped forward. Visor pulled back to show a scarred, alien face. Her name was Krisa, and Sarah remembered her well. Cold eyes, sharper than knives, loyal only to victory. "You've survived." "Longer than expected," Krisa said, her voice clear in the dry air. Sarah raised her chin, the wind catching her hair. "I wasn't alone," she replied. Krisa's eyes flicked toward Ethan. Then back to Sarah. "Did he save you, or did you corrupt him?" she asked. Sarah didn't answer, but Ethan did. "I built her a home," he said simply. That seemed to confuse them more than any threat. Krisa raised a hand, and her soldiers moved, slowly. Spreading around the shelter, Sarah held her ground, knowing the moment would break soon. She could see one of the soldiers trying to scan the stone walls. Another kicked one of the traps. Nothing happened. They were too smart to fall for the obvious ones, but they hadn't found everything. "Hand her over," Krisa said, "and we'll let you walk away." Ethan didn't speak. Syra did. "You always lied with that tone," she said, stepping forward, spear in hand. "I know you'll kill him, then me." Krisa gave a half smile. "Cold and hollow. You're not worth much, Sarah. But orders are orders." The first shot came fast. But Ethan was faster. He pulled the hidden wire that ran behind the wall, and 2 sharpened logs launched from the side trench. One hit its mark. The soldier on the left screamed and fell. Chaos broke. Sarah ran forward, ducking behind a low wall, and threw her spear. Striking another in the leg, Ethan tackled the third with a broken stone in hand. Smashing his helmet with sheer force, Krisa barked commands, but her team scattered under the surprise. Then came the sound they feared, the 6th one, from inside the ship, heavy footsteps. Far too heavy for any regular soldier. Sarah turned and saw a tall mechanical unit step down. Glowing red beneath its chest armor, a battle drone half-living, half-machine. Armed with dual pulse cannons, Ethan looked at her, and she looked back. No words were needed. They ran together. Luring it toward the trench, the drone followed. Slow but deadly. Its first shot missed them by inches, exploding a wall of stone behind them. Sarah reached the ridge, jumped behind a marker, and triggered the final trap-a-net of thick metal wires, charged with energy from her stolen tech. The trap snapped shut, sparks flying. The drone screaming with a strange mechanical cry. It didn't die instantly. It fought the net, breaking one arm free, raising a weapon, but Ethan jumped from the side, landing on its back with all his strength. He shoved a spear deep into the back panel. The lights flickered, then died. The drone fell still. Smoke rose from the ridge, and the battlefield was quiet again. 3 soldiers dead, 1 captured, Krisa wounded and retreating. Sarah dropped her weapon and walked back toward the shelter. The doorway was cracked. A few stones scattered, but it still stood. Ethan joined her, covered in dirt and ash. She looked at him, breathing hard. "We built it strong," she said. He nodded, then smiled. "Strong enough for war." She touched one of the stones with her hand. "No," she said. "Strong enough for a future." The ground was still scorched from the fight. Bits of metal and broken armor lay scattered. Across the dirt, the air smelled like smoke and cracked plasma. But inside the stone walls, there was peace. Ethan sat by the fire, carefully cleaning a cut on his shoulder. Sarah moved slowly around the shelter, stacking fallen stones. Returning order to the place they had built, neither of them spoke much. That morning, words felt too heavy after what they had survived. When the roof beam cracked under the weight of one of the blast impacts, Ethan didn't panic. He simply stood up, rolled his sleeves, and got to work. Sarah joined him, her steps slower than before. Her side aching from a hit she had taken, but pain no longer ruled. Hurt reminded her she was alive. They worked, without speaking for hours, their movements smooth and practiced. They knew each other's rhythm now, like 2 hands of the same body. Ethan lifted heavy beams. Sarah sealed the cracks with earth and resin. They didn't rebuild out of fear, but out of something deeper. Hope, maybe, or stubbornness, or a silent promise neither of them had said out loud when the sun dropped low. Painting the sky with orange and violet, Sarah sat near the fire and finally asked the question that had lived quietly in her chest for days. "Why did you help me that day?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked into the flames, then picked up a small piece of stone, turning it in his hand. "My squad left me too," he said softly. "They thought I was dead. After a supply mission went wrong. They didn't." "Come back." Sarah stared at him, surprised by the words. "You've been here alone since then?" He nodded, found a signal pod, tried calling for rescue. No one ever came, so I started building. I figured if I was going to die here, I'd at least leave something behind. Sarah leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "So when you found me, you were already building this place?" Ethan gave a small smile. "I was building for myself," he said. "Now I build for us." The words sank into her like warmth. Slow and unexpected. She had no answer. Just a feeling in her chest she didn't have a name for. The kind of feeling that made her want to stay alive. That night, the stars were clearer than they had ever seen. A cold wind passed through the hills, but the walls held firm. Inside, they shared food. And Sarah surprised Ethan with a drink made from boiled roots and berries she had discovered. It was bitter but warm, and they both laughed for the first time in what felt like years. The next day, they found tracks small, scattered, but fresh. Not enemies this time, but travelers, maybe survivors like them. Sarah followed the prints to the edge of a dried river, where she found a cloth bundle tucked under a rock. Inside was food half spoiled on a small note. It was written in broken trade language. Only 2 words, need help. She brought it back to Ethan, and they stared at the words together. There was silence again, not the cold kind, but the kind that waits for a choice. We're not the only ones out here, Sarah said. Ethan placed the note near the fire and nodded. Then maybe it's time this place became more than just our home. That afternoon, they cleared out the second chamber of the shelter. It had started as a storage space, but they widened it, reinforced it, added bedding made from soft moss and cloth scraps. They cleaned everything, and Syra even carved symbols. On the outside wall, the old signs of safety used by her people long ago. It meant this is a place where you won't be hurt for the first time. Their home wasn't just a hiding place. It was a promise. They waited 2 more days before anyone came. A small figure appeared near the ridge at sunset, covered in a dark coat, limping slightly. Sarah walked out alone, arms open, no weapon in hand. The traveler was a young alien male, barely past youth, frightened and starving. He saw her, froze in fear. Then saw the sign behind her carved into stone. He cried just once, then ran toward her by nightfall. He was sleeping under the roof they built, wrapped in spare cloth, safe and fed. Ethan looked at Sarah across the fire and said, "We'll need more rooms." She smiled and replied, "And more stones." The house they built had become something greater, a place for the broken, the lost, the forgotten. And it all started with a single act of kindness. A quiet man, a dying warrior, and a stone laid in dirt. The sound of laughter wasn't something Syra expected to hear again. But now, it echoed between stone walls that once stood silent and bare. Children played with sticks, chasing one another through the garden path she and Ethan had carved weeks ago. Their voices, light and bright, danced through the air like birds finally free to fly. The house had changed. It wasn't just a home anymore, it had become a village. 3 shelters stood beside the original stone hut, each one different, but each one strong. Built by hands, once broken, now steady. Every stone told a story. Every wall remembered a battle. A night of hunger, a moment of peace. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow and looked over the growing field of root vegetables they had planted. He had never been a farmer, never planned to become a builder. But Sarah often joked he was both now along with cook, guard, and sometimes reluctant teacher. Syra herself was no longer the same either. Gone was the shadowed warrior who had once laid in the dust, waiting to die. Now she stood tall, her old armor repurposed as plating over the outer walls, her blade worn but ready. The children called her Stone Mother, not because she was cold, but because she had never fallen. No matter what tried to break her, new people arrived every week. Some walked alone, half-starved. Others came in small groups, whispering about what they heard in quiet corners of the stars. A place where a human and an alien woman had built something no war could burn. A place where no one was judged for what they used to be. Sarah and Ethan welcomed them all, not with grand speeches, but with stones and food and a simple question: "Can you help build?" One evening, as the orange sun dipped behind the cliffs, a familiar sound rumbled through the sky. A ship not hostile, not fast, but steady approached from the west. Everyone paused, tools frozen, eyes turned upward. Syra stepped forward, eyes narrowing as the ship slowed and landed on the outer ridge. Ethan stood beside her, one hand resting near the handle of a hammer, not in fear, but in caution. The ship door opened, and from the smoke stepped a woman in faded uniform, human, tall, gray-haired, eyes sharp but tired. She looked around the growing village with surprise, as if she expected ruins, not life. Then her gaze landed on Ethan, and she let out a quiet breath. "Lieutenant Ethan Cross," she said, her voice rough. You were listed missing 6 years ago. Ethan stepped forward, slowly. Still here, he said simply. The officer scanned the camp, the children, the walls, the alien woman at Ethan's side. This wasn't on any map, she said. Sarah replied for him. It wasn't meant to be. The officer's eyes softened as she looked around once more. We've received signals, stories, even rumors. But no one believed it, she said. A human and an alien building a sanctuary together. Ethan nodded. We didn't plan it, it just became this. The woman stepped forward. Closer now. Galactic Command is changing slowly. She said carefully. There are places that could learn from this. Syra crossed her arms, not out of defiance, a protectiveness. This place wasn't built for officials or politics. It was built from kindness. The officer gave a sad smile, and that's exactly why it matters. They spoke for a long time, until stars filled the sky. The ship didn't leave that night, and its lights joined the soft glow of the fires below. Syra stood at the edge of the village, watching the new arrivals settle. Her thoughts quiet but steady. Ethan walked up behind her and held something. In his hand a small flat stone, smooth and unmarked. He handed it to her. What's this? She asked, turning it in her fingers. He smiled, just a little. The last stone, he said. Sarah looked at him, confused. He nodded toward the center of the village, where a circle of stones surrounded the oldest fire pit. There's one. Space left, he said. We've added a stone every time someone found a home here. Except for the first two. Cyrus stared at the fire pit. Then at the stone. Her chest felt warm, like something gentle had taken root deep inside. She walked over slowly and with both hands placed the stone into the gap. The circle was complete. People gathered quietly, sensing something important had happened. They stood together, human, alien, young, old, broken. Healing all, watching that final stone. Syra stepped back beside Ethan, and for once, she spoke without armor in her voice. We didn't just build a home, she whispered. Ethan nodded. Eyes on the fire. We built a future, and above them, the stars watched in silence. Not as cold witnesses, but as old friends who finally saw something worth lighting.